Hi there, Alison here with another Cab Franc du jour. Today's wine is taking us to the Niagara Peninsula in Ontario, Canada. And we're looking at the Fogolar Wines 2016 Picone Vineyard Cabernet Franc. Fogolar Wines was launched by Marc Pistor in 2013. Marc has been making wine in the Niagara region since 2005, and before setting out on his own with Fogolar, he was the assistant winemaker at Enniskillen and the head winemaker for Arterra Wines, the parent company of Enniskillen. Paying homage to his Friulian roots, the word Fogolar, which comes from the local Furlan dialect, translates to hearth or gathering place for sharing food and wine with family and friends. Marc's focus at Fogolar is Riesling and Cabernet Franc, both for their suitability in producing consistently excellent wines in the Niagara region, regardless of vintage, and for their ability to express a sense of place in the glass. Marc is working with select growers and vineyards for both varieties, and today we are looking at his Cabernet Franc from the Picone Vineyard. If Ontario was ever to adopt a cruise system in an effort to recognize top vineyard and variety combinations, there are a handful of sites for Cabernet Franc that I think merit consideration because of their track record of excellence and their terroir expressiveness for the variety. And the Picone Vineyard is one of those sites for Cabernet Franc. Located just west of the village of Vineland in the Vinemount Ridge VQA subappellation, here at the Picone Vineyard, there is 1.37 acres of Cabernet Franc vines that were planted in the early 1980s, making these some of the oldest Cabernet Franc vines in the province of Ontario. This is a vineyard site for Cabernet Franc that I have been following since the beginning of my career. First when the fruit was being vinified by Ravine Vineyard, and Marc has been vinifying the fruit for Fogolar since 2014. The Vinemount Ridge VQA subappellation is one of 3 appellations, along with Creek Shores and the Lincoln Lakeshore, that are not part of either the Niagara-on-the-Lake or Niagara Escarpment regional appellations. The Vinemount Ridge appellation is quite a large area. It stretches about 40 kilometers from east to west, and it covers an area of about 120 square kilometers. So there's quite a bit of variability, you can imagine, from site to site. Now in general, as a whole, the Vinemount Ridge VQA subappellation sits atop the Niagara Escarpment, set back from Lake Ontario, and is defined by 2 geological features, the Vinemount Moraine and the Fonthill Cane. And the Vinemount Moraine is situated to the west and to the north of the region, and then the Fonthill Cane is in the east. Now, in terms of viticulture, even though this is obviously a very large area, there are some broad observations that we can make about the growing environment here. First and foremost, as I mentioned, we are set back from Lake Ontario, and that means the vineyards here will experience less of a moderating influence from the lake, and that results in a few different factors that contribute to the viticulture here. First and foremost, bud break will actually be a little bit earlier than average. The growing season will be shorter but warmer, and the winters will be colder. And that means that Vinemount Ridge has the fewest number of growing degree days compared to any region, subappellation within the Niagara Peninsula. In addition to this, because of this position set back from Lake Ontario atop the Niagara Escarpment and the prevailing winds that are coming in from the southwest, the region in general will experience a wider diurnal range in temperatures, so cooler nights to offset those slightly warmer days, and this will help to slow down ripening and preserve acidities. Now, in terms of soils, the soils do vary quite a bit across this very large area, but what we tend to see here is a lot more clay in the topsoil versus other subappellations in the Niagara region. Now, getting back to the Picone Vineyard, this vineyard is located about 6 kilometers south of Lake Ontario, and we are right at the northern edge of the Vinemount Ridge VQA subappellation, on what would be considered part of the Vinemount Moraine. Now, back in the fall of 2020, I visited this vineyard site with Marc and viticulturalist Phil Clark in order to get a better sense of why this was such a special spot for Cabernet Franc. So the vineyard block here has a slightly more north-facing exposure. We're at an elevation of around 187 meters above sea level, and the site is quite open and exposed. And Phil said that because of this openness and exposure that this site has, it receives very good ventilation and also very good sun exposure. Now, in terms of soil, the limestone bedrock, which is quite a ways down, is topped by what Phil calls a pesky blue clay, and that is referring to the clay's density and thickness. And because of this pesky blue clay, we'll call it, this site is naturally low yielding, so they won't need to go in and do green harvesting in most vintages. Phil and his team will come in and they will do some shoot thinning at the beginning of the season, leaf pulling as needed in order to balance the yield and the canopy. But in general, this site naturally yields around 3 to 3.5 tons per acre. So this site is a cool site. It is a slow ripening site for Cabernet Franc, but it does have a slightly longer growing season. So Cabernet Franc can achieve good phenolic development here with this long, generous hang time. Now, in terms of the winemaking, Marc takes a very classical approach here. So the fruit is hand harvested. It is mostly destemmed. He does do about 15% or so whole cluster, depending on the vintage. The fruit is then vinified in 1-ton open-top fermenters with a combination of indigenous and cultured yeast, and the total time on skins is about 28 days. Now, after pressing, the free-run wine and pressed wine will be combined, and that will be aged in barrel for around 16 to 18 months. Now, Marc explained to me that from this block of Cabernet Franc, he generally gets about 8 to 10 barrels worth of wine. And the wine will age in a combination of French and American oak, 20 to 30% new. And then when it comes time for bottling, Marc will do a selection of about 3 or 4 of the top barrels, the best barrels. And these tend to come from the French oak as opposed to the American oak. And this will be what will make up the Picone Vineyard single vineyard bottling of Cabernet Franc for Fogolar. So let's tuck into this wine. Oh, I should note as well, this is the 2016 vintage, as I said, and 2016 was a very good vintage for red wines in Ontario, in the Niagara Peninsula in particular. It was a warm, dry, long vintage with a very long ripening season. And you know what? The warmth of the vintage does really kind of come through in the glass. There is a certain plushness to the fruit profile, a certain sweetness as well. There is an expressiveness and an openness to the nose. And the fruits lean, as I said, more sweet but red. I'm getting a little bit of Bing cherry here, a touch of kirsch. There's a bit of like a strawberry compote thing going on as well. And I would say the wine leans a little bit more fruit forward. The pyrazines are there, you know it's Cab Franc, but definitely leans a little bit more fruit forward. I love how the pyrazines are coming through. There's this beautiful like rhubarb compote thing going on. There's a bit of cedar here, a touch of cigar box. There's a bit of rosemary as well. There's a bit of spiciness on the nose that's coming through. That could be the barrel. It's a bit of clove. There's a touch of allspice as well. There's a nice delicate floral underpinning as well, like violets or even perhaps lilacs. But really, I love the nose, and there's something about the nose that is instantly inviting. On the palate, those same primarily red fruits come through really nicely, and there's a little bit of like a raspberry note on the palate, even like a wild black raspberry note too, actually, on the palate, which is coming through as well. But in general, those fruits, those kind of more succulent, lush, plush fruits, sweeter fruits, do come through, kind of signaling that warmer vintage. In terms of the spice notes, I'm getting a bit more evolved spice notes. There is some of that baking spice thing that we say, but there's also a little bit of a varietal spice thing happening on the palate as well. Which for me is coming through as like a bit of a black pepper note, which is really nice. And there is a little bit of tertiary here, but not as much as I actually expected. This is a 2016 vintage. It's been in bottle for some time. I expected a little bit more tertiary development, especially considering this was a warmer vintage, and usually those vintages evolve a little bit quicker, but surprisingly, this is still feeling quite youthful to me. In terms of the acidity is very mouth-watering, very persistent. And that was something I underlined in my notes, was how persistent that acidity is. Yeah, so what leads here is this wonderful, sumptuous, lush fruit profile. And then the acidity comes in at the end and it gives you this wonderful cleansing effect, which is really lovely. The tannins are velvety. They have a slight chew to them as well. There's a firmness to the tannins, but there's a nice ripeness to the tannins as well. And I think the way the tannins and the fruit are working together here is really, really lovely. So immediately what I sense in the mouth in terms of the palate, in terms of the structure, is this breadth, this density. And that makes a lot of sense for me in all previous encounters I've had with this, with Cabernet Franc from the Picone Vineyard, is the clay gives an impact. You know, there's some power here, there's some richness behind the site, but then you get that wonderful freshness at the end, as if you just have that beautiful cleansing acidity that kind of pulls everything in. And that's really the arc of this wine, is it leads with fruit, and then it kind of comes in with this wonderful acidity and then finishes in this very kind of sumptuous way. And that's certainly the vintage coming through, but there is a definite density to the wine, a certain breadth to the wine, a certain roundness to the wine as well, which just again signals to me that there's like a bit more of a clay influence here, particularly like a heavy, deeper clay. And in general, you know, this wine is serious, but it's inviting at the same time. Like when I first opened it, I took a sniff and it was like you just instantly want to dive in because there's a lot going on here. But it is serious, you know, there's a lot going on here, and the site comes through for me. And I know that's a bold statement to say, but I've had a lot of experience with this grape and this site, and from different hands as well. And I do believe that this is dare I say it, like a Grand Cru level place for Cabernet Franc in the Niagara region. And it's a wine that has sufficient fruit, acid, and structure to really go the distance. I think the 16 right now is showing quite beautifully, actually. It's very open, very generous, but I do think that this has the ability to get even better. I would love to revisit this one in probably 5 years' time, even potentially 10 years' time, to see where it goes, because I think Marc managed the fruit beautifully for this vintage. And actually, as a matter of fact, I should note as well, for those that are living in the province of Ontario, the Picone Vineyard Cabernet Francs are currently available in a vintage lot of 6 bottles that you can buy direct from Marc, which is amazing. So you can get the 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, and 20 vintages, a vertical from Picone Vineyard Cabernet Franc from Fogolar, which is absolutely amazing. Great as a gift, perhaps, for someone for the upcoming holidays. It's July and I'm already thinking about holidays, but nevertheless, I wanted to make note that these wines are available. This 16 is currently available as part of a vertical 6-pack, which is really, really cool. If you've had the Fogolar Picone Vineyard Cabernet Franc, or any of Fogolar's Cabernet Francs, he also makes a great rosé as well. Let me know what you thought of them in the comments below, or perhaps if you've got a back vintage from Ravine that perhaps you've tucked into recently, let me know what you thought of that wine in the comments below. And of course, as always, I will be back again soon with another wine. Cheers.